If you load a lot of custom kits that contain samples to your Roland TD-17, TD-27, TD-50 or 50X module, you might have run into some issues like error messages that say you've run out of space, or finding that kits have missing samples or the wrong samples playing on some pads. These are typically caused by running out of user sample memory, and it can be particularly frustrating when there are a bunch of free user kit slots left on the module. Why is this? Can you not actually fit 100 kits on these modules? And more importantly, how do you get around or fix this? So there are two kinds of memory on the module that kits use, which are both kind of separate from each other, but they do interact. When you load a .td0 kit file to your module, the first thing it loads is the kit settings. These are what get installed to one of the 100 kit slots, and it's basically just information telling the module what values to assign for everything from the instruments to the various effects. Then, if the .td0 file contains samples and you have the with user sample box checked when you load it, the module puts these audio files into sample slots in the user sample memory. The sample slot numbers of the loaded samples will be synced with the kit settings, so this means that the kit plays back the right sample when you hit the pads. It makes sense for the module to load files this way because not all kit files will contain samples, so you could actually fill up 100 kit slots without ever running out of user sample space. On the other hand, you could technically fill the entire sample memory with one kit file if it had really big samples. The problem is, if you don't have enough user sample space left for all of the samples contained inside the kit file, that first part of the process still happens. It loads the kit settings, but then it will attempt to load the samples and it will run out of room, either loading some of them or none of them, depending on how much space was left before you loaded the kit. You'll still be able to see the kit in the slot, and it will look like it is loaded, but some of the samples might be missing. If this happens, the module assigns the user sample slot numbers that were used when the kit was created on the original module that it was created on, but your module will probably have different samples on it, so there might be no sample in that slot or a completely different one. The sample space on all of the current Roland modules is quite small. The TD-17 appears to have around 32 MB of user sample memory, and the TD-27, 50 and 50X appear to have around 128 MB. To further exacerbate this issue, the more recent version 2 software for the TD-17 and TD-27 have quite a few stock user samples already installed on the module. In the TD-17's case, these take up 56% of the memory before you even load a single sample yourself. So if you load a few kits with samples, like practically every kit on the eDrum Workshop store, you can end up running out quite quickly and potentially hitting one of these problems. So to deal with this, you can delete samples to free up more space, and you can use the module backup features to swap between backup files. And that gives you access to potentially thousands of kits. Module backup files save all of the settings on your module, everything from your kits to the trigger settings, and if you choose to do so, they also save all of the samples you have on the module. Now, I always recommend creating a backup of your module before you make any changes like deleting samples, so let's cover backups first. Ensure that you have an SD card inserted in your module and that it's been previously formatted in the module. Then, on a TD-17 module, go to Setup, SD card, Save Backup. On a TD-27 module, go to System, SD card, Save. And on a TD-50 or 50X module, go to SD card, Save. Ensure that the with user sample box is checked so that the samples are saved with the backup file. Then choose a backup bank number to save to on your SD card. Hit the next or save button to proceed to the next screen. You can choose a unique name for your backup file by hitting F1 name on the TD-17 or F4 name on the TD-27, 50 or 50X. And then when you're happy, you can hit execute to save the backup. Depending on the amount of samples that you have on your module, it might take a few minutes to complete the backup. You can save up to 99 backups on your SD card, so you've got plenty of room to create multiple backups. From this point, you have a choice. You can just delete some of the samples that you don't use to create some space, then continue to load more kits or samples to fill it back up again. Or you could wipe all of the samples, load an entirely new set of kits, and then save another backup containing those kits and samples. I'll run you through identifying and deleting individual samples first. Now, the bad news is that it's not possible to remove the samples installed by a kit by just overwriting the kit slot with another kit. This is because the sample memory is separate, as we discussed. So doing this would just overwrite the kit settings, but any new samples will just be added to the module alongside the previous ones. The same goes for loading the same kit file twice, it just duplicates the samples. So to free up space, we need to manually delete them from the user sample memory. On a TD-17 module, just hit the user sample button. Or on a TD-27, TD-50 or 50X, go to user sample, then select the list or sample list option. The first bunch of samples will most likely be the stock or factory samples that came installed on your module. This differs from module to module, so in the description I've linked to some documents that detail the stock samples for each individual module. You can also see which stock kits they're used on so that you can work out which ones you don't use if you want to delete them. After this, you'll see the samples that you've loaded yourself or that have been installed by loading kits. For any of the kits on my store, my typical naming convention looks like this. EDW identifies that it's a sample from the eDrum workshop. The next section identifies the kit that it belongs to. Then the final section is the pad or zone that the sample is for. Some kits might just have snare samples, so it might just say H or R for head or rim. Some will have things like K for kick, SNH for the snare head, and so on. To delete a sample, highlight the one that you want to delete, and then, on the TD-17, hit F2 menu, then scroll down to delete, hit enter and then confirm it. Or on a TD-27, TD-50 or 50X, hit F3 delete and then confirm it. You can go through the remainder of the user sample list to find the rest of the samples that you wish to delete. Alternatively, if you want to start completely fresh after making your first backup, you can delete all of your samples at once. On the TD-17, press the user sample button, then hit F2 menu, scroll down to delete all, hit enter and then confirm it. On the TD-27, press the user sample button, then either scroll across to delete all or press F5 to select delete all, then hit enter and confirm it. On the TD-50 or 50X, go to the user sample menu, hit page down, then press F3 delete all and confirm the action. This will remove all of the samples from your module. Now, you could use the factory reset option instead here, but this will also reset all of the other settings on your module, trigger settings, options that you've picked in the menus, and so on. And it will also restore all of the factory user samples too. So I don't generally recommend factory resets if you don't need the stock samples on every backup that you create. Deleting all of the samples is cleaner and it keeps your other settings intact. Once you've loaded more kits or samples to your module, you can now create a second backup by following the backup save process outlined earlier on. Make sure to choose a different backup slot on your SD card so that you don't overwrite the previous one, and maybe give it an easily identifiable name so that you know which is which. To swap between backups, go back to the SD card menu and select the load option instead. You can then scroll through all of your backups and load whichever backup contains the kits that you want to play. Ensure that the with user sample box is checked so that the samples from that backup will always be loaded in place of the ones currently on your module. As mentioned in the save section, it might take a few minutes to load a backup with a lot of samples, but for home use it's pretty unintrusive and it beats running out of space. Also worth mentioning, if you load and delete samples regularly, the module manuals explain that the onboard memory could become fragmented, which can reduce the number of samples that you're able to load. In this case, you can use the Optimize option found in the user sample menu screens. Just bear in mind the warnings that are contained in the manuals. If you find that there are gaps in your sample list and you want to get rid of those, you can use the renumber option. This will move all user samples up to fill the empty slots so that now they're consecutive. The sample numbers on the kits that they're used on will also be reassigned so that they still play the correct samples. It is possible to save and load backup files without taking user samples into consideration. If you uncheck the with user sample box, it will create a backup containing only settings and no samples. Now, this can be useful in certain circumstances. For example, if you like to create a lot of kits using the same samples, this can let you swap between batches of kits without having to wait for the samples to load every time. The main downside though to that approach is that if you remove or renumber any of the samples after making a backup, it could affect the sample assignments on that previous backup when you reload it. Now, the handy thing about backups is that you can actually pull kits directly out of a backup file to add it to your module without saving the individual kits yourself. If you want to know how to do this, how to restore overwritten factory presets without doing a full reset, or even how to duplicate kits or swap instruments between them, good news! In this video, I answer those questions and show you everything that you can do with the copy menu to make using your module quicker and easier. Or if you're just looking for more kits to add to your module, go check out my store over at the eDrumWorkshop.com. But above all, enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers!